big welcome to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast. I'm Dr. Nerida, professional equine nutritionist, founder of the My Happy Horse Nutrition app and lover of off-the-track racehorses. Today, we're talking about feeding your off-the-track in their first 12 months with you. And honestly, this first year matters more than most people realise. You see, most off-the-tracks don't arrive as a blank slate on the inside. They've usually had a busy racing lifestyle, often a ton of high-energy feeds, and that combination can leave them more at risk of having gastric ulcers and with a hindgut that's not as good at fibre digestion as we'd like. And when the gut's unhealthy, it will show up as things like poor appetite, difficult behaviour, and being slow to put weight on and keep it on. So the plan for today is really practical. For feeding in the first 6 months off the track, we're going to focus on gut health, getting plenty of forage in, keeping things simple, making sure the diet is balanced for vitamins and minerals, and helping them settle from racehorse mode into normal horse life. Then, in months 6 to 12, once the gut is in a better place, we can talk about weight gain and muscle. But with one big caution, weight gain diets can and will change behaviour, sometimes dramatically. So we'll talk about how to do weight gain safely without creating a horse that is too hot to handle. When done well, your off-the-tracks nutrition in their first 12 months with you can set them up for a lifetime of calm behaviour, amazing health, and an ability to hold weight on very little hard feed. All right, let's get into what to feed, when and why, so you can set your off-the-track up for a calm brain, a healthy gut, and a great first year and beyond with you. So I've done a lot of work in this feeding the off-the-track space in recent years. Racing Queensland have had me create a bunch of nutrition education videos for their Queensland off-the-track nutrition education hub. If you are really interested in digging into the finer details of feeding and off-the-track, go on and look up the Queensland Off-the-Track Nutrition Education Hub online. There is 15 and soon to be 16 videos up there, and we go through all of this foundational nutrition for off-the-tracks and then branch out into very specific topics about feeding the off-the-track. So I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at that resource. It is free for everyone. And being as committed as I am to my work, I had said to Queensland Off the Track, what if for the last video in this series, I actually take an off the track and follow her progress and track her through her first 12 months off the track. So we're coming up to 15 months now with Alay here, but we took on this beautiful off-the-track thoroughbred, and she's been here with us now for about 15 months. So I'll tell you some stories of her journey as we go along, but her journey was just a great, reinforcement of the fact that if you do the work that we're going to talk about in this podcast episode with getting their gut back to a really healthy place, it gives you a horse later on that will have truly beautiful behaviour, and they really are able to maintain weight on very, very little feed. It's just a matter of rehabbing their gut back from racehorse mode into, normal horse mode. I always struggle to find a word that explains them, but it's normal horse mode, a horse that has got a gut that is populated with the right microbes and is no longer ulcerated, all of those things that add up to really good gut health. And it just means that you will be able to maintain your off-the-tracks on very little hard feed, and their behaviour is not what some of us might immediately think of as typical off-the-track behaviour. Alay, at home is so quiet we could put small kids on her, partly her personality, but also too, I'm sure that it's at least in part due to the way she's fed. So let's put ourselves back in the position of getting an off-the-track, and the off-the-track arrives possibly straight out of the racing stable, possibly like Alay was for us. She'd spent a couple of months with a broodmare band on a thoroughbred farm and had been still eating a reasonably high-grain diet, but she wasn't straight out of the racing stable for us. But it doesn't really matter. I occasionally have people say to me, well, what if I've had my off-the-track for ages? So if you're in that position where you have had your off-the-track for, months or even a year or more, if you're still struggling with their nutrition, and particularly if you're still struggling with their appetite or their behaviour or their ability to gain weight, it's a good idea to start from the beginning again as if they are fresh off the track. So when you're listening to me talking about months 1 through 6 and then next 6 months through to 12 months, even if you've had your horse for quite a while, start at the beginning with us from month 1 and follow this program through, because it just allows your horse's gut to rehab back to being really healthy. And then from that point on, you will find them so much healthier, so much easier to handle, and much, much easier to keep weight on. So if we have an off the track arrive and it's, their first month with us, or month 1, as I just said, from now, our goals in the first 6 months are really all around gut health. There's 3 or 2 specific gut health goals, and then a third goal that sort of flows on from the first 2. So our first goal in the first 6 months is to support their stomach in healing from gastric ulcers if ulceration is present. So it's not 100% that a horse coming out of racing will have gastric ulcers, of course, but there's a very high percentage of off the tracks who will have some degree of gastric ulceration. Now, this is very much a veterinary issue, and you need to work closely with your veterinarian to diagnose the ulcers and then treat the ulcers appropriately depending on the kind of ulceration that your off the track may have. So do work closely with your vet in the first 6 months, particularly if your horse is showing signs of ulceration, which the tricky thing with gastric ulcers is the symptoms of ulceration can be symptoms for so many other things. And there is some horses, they're so stoic that they'll have gastric ulceration and you won't know because they don't actually show any symptoms from them. So do work with your vet to work out whether your horse does have ulceration and then the best way to treat that. All we're doing from a nutrition perspective is to support the stomach in healing from any gastric ulcers that may be present through nutrition. So your vet will help you treat the gastric ulcers, and then the nutrition will support that healing, and then also create a really healthy stomach environment where we're not aggravating it, continuing to aggravate it and continuing to cause gastric ulceration through the way that we feed. So that's our first goal. Second goal is to provide lots and lots of fibre. Just get their gut full of fibre again and start the process of transitioning their hindgut microbes back to being predominantly the good fibre-fermenting microbes that we want in all horses' hindguts. So by virtue of their racing diets, often off the tracks we'll have a hindgut microbiome that is shifted more towards the sugar and starch fermenting microbes and away from the microbes who we consider the good microbes, which are the fibre fermenting microbes. Now, if you want to catch yourself up a little bit on the horse's microbiome, go back and have a listen to episodes 9, 10 and 11 on the Happy Horse Nutrition podcast. They're all talking about the hindgut microbiome and then digging into detail on ways to feed to support the hindgut microbiome. I will talk about it also in this podcast, but if you want to dig into the details more, those 3 podcasts are great ones to go and check out. And then our third goal, I said, sort of comes off the back of those first 2, but it's to lower the energy levels in your off-the-tracks diet and to allow your off-the-tracks behaviour to transition essentially from being a racehorse, high-octane racehorse, down to being a calm, ridden horse for you. And that will kind of naturally happen just with the way that we feed for gut health. In the first 6 months, just to reiterate that, the first 6 months, the entire focus is on getting their gut back to being healthy. And in the first month, all I wanted to do for a lay and all I recommend for off the tracks is basically to get their gut full of forage and fibre again. And the best way to do that is to give them access to pasture 24/7. So if you have pasture, if it's a luxury that you have, then put them out on pasture and let them graze 24/7, and also give them access to loosen hay twice a day. So that means that one of the things we really need off the tracks to remember is that they are grazing animals. So if we can give them access to pasture 24/7 and give them loosen hay twice a day, that helps them to go, that's right, I go and eat this stuff that's on the ground called pasture, and that's where I get the majority of my food from, as opposed to hanging around the gate and waiting for you to bring hard feeds out to them. If you don't have pasture, then make sure that you give them hay, so grassy hay, and as much as is physically possible, having that grassy hay available to them 24/7, and also still feed them lucerne or alfalfa, same thing, just 2 different names depending on where you are in the world. giving them lucerne hay still twice a day when they're on 24/7 grassy hay. The 24/7 pasture or 24/7 grassy hay does a beautiful job of filling up their gut, and the forages will also provide a majority of the energy that they need and a majority of the protein that they need in this first month off the track. But a pasture and hay-based diet is not going to be a fully balanced diet. There is inherently low levels of minerals in nearly every forage I've ever seen an analysis for anywhere in the world. So copper and zinc, nearly always low in every forage around the world, and depending on which country you're in, so places like Australia and Japan, we're very, very low in selenium. Australia is also very low in iodine. So there's going to be minerals that you need to add into your horse's diet. And also too, if your horse is either on hay that's been sitting around for longer than about 6 months, or pasture that is reasonably browned off, the vitamins like vitamin A and vitamin E will start to get very low. So vitamin A and vitamin E both disappear out of hay, or start to disappear out of hay as soon as the hay is cut. And by 6 months, there's very little left. By 12 months, there is virtually none left. So we do need to make sure, even though we don't want to feed a lot of hard feed as such in this first month, because our entire focus is on filling their gut up with forage, we do want to put either a high-quality vitamin mineral supplement or a high-quality balancer pellet into their diet to make sure that you are meeting those crucial vitamin and mineral requirements that aren't necessarily being provided by their pasture. They should also have free choice salt. Every horse should have free choice salt at all times, but it is really important for off the tracks to make sure you have free choice salt available. And you might also choose, depending on your off the track specific situation, you might also choose to use a high quality gut health supplement. If their hooves are in a little bit of disrepair, you might choose to use a high quality hoof supplement to help them along. But other than that, so other than the 24/7 access to grassy forage, either hay or pasture, lucerne or alfalfa hay twice a day, and when I say twice a day, I mean a flake or a biscuit or whatever you might happen to call it, depending on where you are in the world. But a biscuit twice a day, which is about 4 kilos or around 8.8 pounds of lucerne or alfalfa per day in this first month off the track. And then we'll add a vitamin mineral supplement or a balancer pellet, depending on what your preference is. Free choice salt. You can use a gut health supplement. You might use a hoof supplement. You can, if you like, add some high omega-3 oil or canola oil. Either works okay with horses that are on really high forage diets, just especially if their coat is a bit rough or if their skin looks a bit dry and might need a little bit of a help along with some oil. You can add a small amount of oil, but a quarter of a cup of oil per day. And that's it for horses in their first month. But let me let you in on a little bit of an inside look to how this feels. So when Alay first arrived here, I was determined that I was going to follow exactly my advice that I had given in the Queensland Off the Track nutrition series for the first month, which was exactly as I've just explained. And she arrived here and she's in a new environment. We had 6 other horses, so she had lots of friends, but of course she didn't know any because she just arrived. So she's completely new environment, completely new herd. And she moved a lot. She wasn't chronically fence walking. She wasn't running around at high speed. She wasn't distressed, or she didn't look outwardly distressed, but she just moved a lot. She would graze a little bit. She would walk a little bit. She would graze a little bit. She would walk a little bit. And I was watching her over about the first week to 2 weeks thinking, oh gosh, have I done the right thing here in recommending and she was on a balancer pellet plus her 24/7 pasture plus the lucerne hay and some chaff. And the chaff that I could buy at the time was such poor quality that I got some lucerne pellets as well to put in with her feed, just to have a little bit better quality lucerne in her feed. And I was really panicking in that first month thinking, oh goodness, she's going to lose so much weight and I don't know if I've done the wrong thing here. But I just had to keep reminding myself that the first month is not about putting any weight on them. It's not about seeing any outward change. It's all about filling the gut up with fibre and trying to encourage the fibre-fermenting microbes to come back to the hindgut and build up their populations. And also too, the high forage diet will really support the stomach, especially if it's trying to heal from ulcers, or if you've got a horse that's especially prone to ulcers, having their gut full of fibre constantly in that first month, particularly while they are moving quite a lot and not grazing so much, but that's really all you're giving them to eat, it just means that their stomach has got a much better chance of staying full of fibre. And that means it's a lot lower risk of aggravating any gastric ulcers that might be there, or starting any new gastric ulcers that may not have been there when you first got you off the track. So I will speak from experience here and say it actually does take quite a bit to hold your nerve and feed them like this in the first month, because my instinct at least was to want to feed Alay. I wanted her to look better really quickly in that first month. But fast forward to month 15 now with her, and I look back, I'm so glad I stuck to my guns. I just fed her those forages and the balancer pellet in that first month. And you can see now the benefit in her. We're feeding her, she's on pasture. She gets lucerne in her hard feed, just as a little bit of chaff now. She gets lucerne before she's ridden. But she would be getting about a quarter of a dipper of feed per day, and she's in amazing condition. So this is where we can get them when we stick to the feeding in the first 6 months with the sole focus of feeding them for improving their gut health. Do keep in mind at this point in time that it is really common for off the tracks to go through a shabby phase. So we didn't experience this because Alay had been out in the paddock for a couple of months, but if you get a thoroughbred straight out of racing, they've essentially been under lights because, they start training so early in the morning, the lights come on in the stables, and so it shortens their darkness hours, lengthens their daylight hours, and they tend to maintain a reasonably short summer-like coat. So if you get an off the track, particularly in, the shorter daylight periods of the year, so autumn, winter and the early part of spring, what you might find is that they'll actually start to grow their winter coat. Their coat will change quite quickly because the daylight hours have changed quite quickly for them once they've come out of training. And the other thing to remember too is they do quite a lot of work when they're racehorses, and they will be really well muscled. So Alay was an incredibly muscly mare when we first got her. And you can see now her muscling pattern has changed. So she's a bit older, but she's also not in that really intense work. And she's well muscled, but she doesn't have that really defined muscle structure. So just remember that you're not going to be working them the same way. They're not going to be under lights. And it is common for them to go through a bit of a shabby phase. So again, don't freak out when you see them do that. Resist the temptation to go and pour a whole heap of feed into them, particularly grain-based hard feed at that point, because you'll do a lot more damage in the gut than you will do good. So just if they look shabby, don't panic. It is really normal, and it just takes a bit of patience. So be patient at that stage, and then you'll watch them transform back through to looking amazing as they continue on in their time with you. So we get through that first month of predominantly forage and a balancer pellet. In months 2 to 6, I want you to stay really focused on re-establishing gut health. And the main thing that I want to see happen in off-the-tracks diets in that month 2 to 6 is that we increase the forage and fibre diversity in the diet. Because when you create forage and fibre diversity in the diet, what you're essentially doing is providing a whole banquet of different foods to the microbes in the hindgut. And you will start to encourage a diverse population of microbes in the hindgut. Now, the cool thing with Alay is we actually tracked her hindgut microbes from the time we got her through to 10 months. And the data is really, really cool. There will be a podcast in the coming weeks where I actually talk with Dr. Belinda Chapman, and we will pull Alay's microbiome data apart. So I'll talk about it in detail a lot there. I will just say here that what I'm going to talk about now in months 2 to 6, it works really well for increasing the diversity of microbes in the hindgut. All the different microbes have got different favourite foods. So if you can provide lots of different ingredients, you're providing lots of different foods, and then you're supporting lots of different populations of microbes because they'll all come in and feed on their favourite foods, which I hope makes sense. I saw it described the other day as like workers in a city. And there's the electricians and the plumbers and the builders and the bricklayers, all the different occupations. That's kind of the way you can think about the microbes. They've got different jobs to do, and they'll provide different benefits to your horse. So we need to feed in a way that will encourage as many different types of microbes back into the hindgut as possible. Racing diets, because they're often high grain and because often still a lot of the grain that is fed to racehorses is not very digestible in the small intestine, racing diets do end up dumping a lot of starch in the hindgut. And often too, they're very high grain diets. So even if the starch was very digestible, they'd still be dumping a lot of starch into the hindgut just for the sheer amount of grain that is fed. And when you put starch into the hindgut like that, you favour the starch and sugar fermenting microbes, and they produce a whole heap of acid, and they will actually kill off a lot of the beneficial fibre fermenters. So this months 2 to 6 is essentially, waving the white flag, putting out the olive branch to those fibre fermenters and saying, please come back, we need you, and here's some food that we think you might like. And what our hope is that your horse will find those microbes again, that, they might still be in there, but in really tiny populations, or they'll come from somewhere. It's a question I need to ask Dr. Belinda is, where do they even come from? So in putting out all of these varied fibres, you're essentially, putting out the red carpet to these fibre fermenting bacteria that we want to come back. And they do come back. And that's certainly what we saw in Alay's data. So to build fibre variety in your off-the-tracks diet in these months 2 to 6 is that you've got a couple of different options. So your first option is to keep your off-the-tracks diet the same as you had it in month 1. So lots of your 24/7 access to grassy pasture or grassy hay, lucerne hay twice a day. You can keep the balancer pellet or the vitamin and mineral supplement in there. If you were using an oil, that can stay for sure, and any gut health or hoof supplements that you might be using can also stay in there. And then you can just add some additional fibre types. So by far the best thing to do, and what will give you the biggest bang for buck, is feeding multiple different types of hay if you're on hay, or if you can and you're fortunate and you can create this at home, having a pasture that has got lots and lots of different plant species. That was Alay's massive advantage, I think, in this space, is our pasture, thankfully, has got so many different plant species in it. I was standing there with her. We were filming part of the video for the Queensland Off the Track videos with her, and I was just standing around, had her on a lead, and was just standing around waiting for our videographer to get set up, and was just counting the number of species she was eating while she was just grazing around at my feet. And I counted, I think it was 6 species, and that was just in the tiny little bit of time that I was with her, and there's lots more species out there. So she had a majority of this fibre diversity was created for her out of her varied pasture. Now, if you were feeding one type of hay, so let's say you were feeding just oat and hay or just teff hay or just one single type of hay, you might have been Timothy hay, try and bring in other types of grassy hay. And if the more you can bring in, the more diversity you create, and then the healthier the hindgut microbe population will be. If you have a pasture that's reasonably limited in species, then try and bring in some other different grass forage types. So you could bring in, say, a hay cube or a hay pellet that is a different species to what you have in your pasture, or you might find a hay that your horse is equally happy to eat alongside the pasture. It's always a little bit of a mind bend for people when you've got lots of pasture, and then I turn around and say, now you also need to feed grassy hay. But it's not for the bulk, it's not even for the nutrients, it's just for the fibre diversity that hay creates. So that's going to have the biggest influence on your horse's microbiome, is just trying to get your forages as diverse as possible. Keeping lucerne in there is a massive benefit because you've got legume versus grass. If you also have access to clover hay, then you can feed some clover hay, some lucerne hay, or any other legume really. Some people have got access to random things like peanut hay that you could feed. But the more diverse the forage base of your horse's diet, the healthier their hindgut microbiome is going to be. And then you can also bring in additional fibre types into your hard feed. So you can use ingredients like sugar beet pulp or lupin hulls or well-processed soybean hulls, copra meal, flaxseed meal. You could bring in teff hay cubes or chia seeds or hemp hulls or any other alternate fibre that you might have access to. You can bring those into your horse's diet, and they will just provide food for certain niches of microbes. So certain niches of bacteria and fungi, and the more niches you can create, the more diverse your horse's microbiome is going to be. And the more diverse the microbiome, the better that microbiome is able to support your horse's health. So I read a stat the other day, it was in humans, but it was something like 2/3 or 3/4 of our immune function or immune cells are in our gut. Don't quote me on exactly what it said, but it was a massive part of our immune system resides in our gut. And I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? So if our gut microbes are not the ones that should be in our gut, our immune system's probably not going to work very well. And we think the same is true for horses. So having this diverse microbiome, it helps them with their immune function. There is the very well-established gut-brain axis. So the microbes in your horse's gut actually communicate with them via the gut-brain axis. It truly sounds like science fiction, but I promise you it is true. And in fact, one of the biggest things I see in off the tracks is that when we feed them in this way and when we really focus on rehabbing their gut back to being what a normal horse's gut should look like, their changes in behaviour are quite dramatic. It's really cool to see them. And even when they're in racing, I do this work with racehorses actually in racing, and their changes in behaviour are dramatic, even when they're still on their really high energy diet. So it's absolutely worth trying to bring these different fibre sources in to create this microbiome diversity, because it has so many flow-on beneficial effects. And the other beneficial effect it has, and the one thing that your wallet will absolutely appreciate, is that the more of these fibre-fermenting microbes, so fungi, predominantly fungi and bacteria, the more of them we can encourage back into your horse's hindgut, the more energy your off-the-track will be able to extract from their fibres, so from their pasture and their hay and any other fibrous feed that you're feeding them, and the less hard feed it will take to keep weight on them. And that is absolutely what will happen when you do a really good job of this. Alay, I think I mentioned already, she's on, a quarter of a dipper of feed at the moment, and she's a big girl. She's nearly 17 hands. She does have access to ample pasture, very varied pasture, but she's maintaining beautiful condition and beautiful muscle on very, very little feed. So bringing all of these fibre-fermenting microbes back just means that they're able to digest fibres really well as well, and then they'll be not quite easy keepers, but they'll be very normal keepers. They won't be those classic sort of, I see less of these in today's day and age than I did, say, 15 years ago, but they won't be that classic hard-keeping off-the-track thoroughbred that you're pouring bucket loads of feed into and you still can't maintain their weight. Let me move on to adding fibre variety option 2. So option 1 was keep the diet the same as you had in the first month, but then add varied fibre sources into the diet. Your second option is to, instead of using a balancer pellet and the extra fibres, you could switch to a complete feed that is fibre-based. So there is now a number of complete feeds around all over the world, and they're more prevalent in some parts of the world. So these are very, very common in Europe now, reasonably common in the US. We can get them here in Australia. There's less here than there are in other parts of the world, but they are definitely available, where you get these forage and fibre-based complete feeds that just mean you can bring in the vitamins and minerals your off-the-track needs, as well as some of the protein, as well as some fibre diversity in a complete feed. It's a little bit less messing around. You probably don't get quite the fibre diversity that you would get with using a balancer pellet and then adding fibres yourself. So I went with option 1 for a lay. I kept my balancer pellet and then added in added in sugar beet pulp and lupin hulls and hemp hulls. What else did I put in there? She was on lucerne. She's on teff cubes now, just to bring in a different forage source. But I used that option just because I thought that I could get more fibre variety, and because we were testing her microbiome, I really wanted to get as much diversity into her hindgut as I possibly could to get as much microbiome diversity back. And I will discuss it in the podcast with Belinda that will release in a few weeks' time. So make sure you catch that one, and we'll talk about the change in Alay's gut. But suffice to say, at this point in time, we saw a big jump in microbe diversity from month 1 through to month 5 when she was on this diet that was designed to increase the diversity of microbes in her hindgut. So if you go with option 2 with the complete feeds, they really are useful because they uncomplicate your feed regime. So if you're short on time, or if you have a preference for using complete feeds, or we call them complete feeds in Australia, in the US, complete feeds are a feed that you only feed that feed to a horse. So it's a fortified feed that's designed to be fed at, a portion of the horse's diet, but alongside still hay and pasture. So they are good for a lot of reasons. The disadvantage is you can't adjust the diet as easily to control energy. So when you add some of these fibrous ingredients, some of them like sugar beet pulp and lupin hulls or soybean hulls, they're quite high in energy. And the thing with horses is that they will express the amount of energy in their diet, in their behaviour. So when we start to add these fibres in to create fibre diversity, do be aware that you may start to affect your horse's, your off-the-tracks behaviour. So if you find that you're adding in some of these ingredients and your off-the-tracks behaviour is sort of getting a little bit more energetic than what you would like, you will need to increase the amount of these fibres that you are feeding down just to bring their behaviour back under control. And when you're adding fibres to a balancer pellet, it's easier to do that because when you're adjusting the individual fibres, you're not actually changing the vitamin and mineral intake. But if you're feeding a complete feed, just be aware that or a fortified feed, if you reduce the amount of that fortified feed to control energy, you're also reducing your off-the-tracks vitamin and mineral intake. This is a point in time where the My Happy Horse Nutrition app can really help you out because you'll see if you've got a complete feed in your off-the-tracks diet and you need to reduce that feed to control energy, you can reduce the feed and then the nutrition app will show you that you may have created, say, copper, zinc and vitamin E deficiency. And then you'll be able to then find a supplement that you can use to top up those nutrients in the diet so that you haven't created a deficiency. It's super handy being able to see all of that in My Happy Horse because without actually doing calculations on your off-the-tracks diet, you won't actually know if you're meeting all of the horse's nutrient requirements. And the other cool thing in the app is that it will give you a gut health metric score. So it will help you see whether the diet that you are feeding is supporting really good gut health or whether the diet that you are feeding is not going to do a very good job of gut health. So there's lots and lots of reasons to use it when you're feeding and off the track. And if you haven't already, I'd really encourage you to go and download it from the App Store and run your horse's diet through it. There is a free 7-day trial, so you can run your horse's diet through it and it will help you find any imbalances or any nutrients that are missing and help you to fix those problems in the diet. Also remember too in this months 2 to 4 that you need to keep free choice salt available. It doesn't matter which way you feed, just make sure that you have got salt available. Now, something to keep in mind for these beautiful off the tracks is that company is really important for these horses. So, we know that horses that graze and have time with friends out in pasture are at much lower risk of gastric ulceration. And what I certainly found with Alay is that we put her out with our beautiful old Breeze, who must be, we bought her nearly 5 years ago, in her mid-30s, and we still say that she's in her mid-30s, so we don't actually know how old she is. She just plonks around the paddock. And Alay went out with her, and I am convinced that the fact that Breeze is so steady and she just spends her time walking around slowly and grazing a lot, Alay was able to actually learn just to be slow and steady in the paddock and to spend a lot of time grazing. So grazing with friends is so important. It keeps them calm. It helps them to be less active, particularly if it's an old horse who's not very active. And I laugh and say that sometimes I look out in the paddock and can't figure out whether it's Breeze or Alay because they're both dark brown in colour. And Alay kind of ambles around the paddock now in the same way that Breeze does. And sometimes when they're at a distance, it's a little bit hard to tell them apart. So Breezy has just done such a good job teaching this young thoroughbred just to be calm, and that grazing is a really good thing to spend your time doing. And the other thing is too, when they're grazing with friends, there nearly has to be some transfer of some of the microbes in a horse's gut from horse to horse. So if you can put them out with horses who do have really healthy hindguts, there nearly has to be a transfer, certainly of fungi, but I think also of some of the bacteria, because they're coming into contact with other horses and with other horses' manure, and that will hopefully help them repopulate their gut. Now, there is a big please don't for this first 6 months of feeding and off the track, and that is please don't get you off the track and try to get them to put weight on or muscle on straight away. It is really tempting to do that, and trust me, I'm speaking from experience. I wanted to get a lay and feed her in a way that I absolutely knew would put weight and muscle on her, and I felt like a kid that was being told to sit on both of their hands and not do anything, because I really did have to have a few good talkings to with myself to stop myself from doing that. But the thing with an off the track is the slower you go at the beginning, the faster you'll go at the end. So the more time we can just let their gut rehab itself back to being a gut that essentially is honouring their 55 million year old gut, letting it come back to being full of fibre and to being populated with all of those microbes that have got so many important roles in a horse's gut. The longer you spend doing that, the faster you'll put on weight in the second 6 months. Where if you get them in that first 6 months and you want to fill them full of grain and feed them these really high energy diets, it'll work. You will be able to put weight on them, but the problem is you'll have to keep feeding them that amount of feed almost for the rest of their life, because you won't have them at a point where their hindgut is able to extract all of the energy out of the fibres. So you're constantly relying on hard feed to keep weight on them. So be patient, take your time in this first 6 months, and it really will set your off the track up for a lifetime of better gut health. And that really is worth waiting for. Trust me, it's worth waiting for. Hi, it's Nerida, just jumping in for a sec. If you want clarity around your horse's diet without the stress or the scrolling, the My Happy Horse app is the fastest way to get it. A couple of taps and suddenly everything makes sense. Visit myhappy.horse or download it from the App Store. Okay, let's get back into the good stuff. So if we get through the first 6 months, by now, if you have fed a diet that has got as much pasture or grassy hay as they can eat each day, loosen hay twice a day, you've either had a balancer pellet or a fortified feed in there meeting their vitamins and mineral requirements, and the other bits and pieces, if you chose to use them, the oils and the hoof or the gut supplements. The next 6 months, because you've now laid that foundation of gut health, the next 6 months you can start to look at putting weight on your off the track. So there's 2 steps in feeding for weight gain in the second 6 months. So the first step is to continue feeding for gut health. So the last thing you want to do at this point in time is to undo all of the hard work that you've done in the first 6 months. So in the second 6 months, you still want them to have as much pasture and grassy hay as they want to eat. I would still feed them loosen hay twice a day, but it does very much depend on your pasture and hay quality. So I didn't do that. Our pasture was so good through the winter that we had a lay, which was, the start of the second 6 months with her, that she actually didn't need, once we got past the shortest day of the year and our pasture kind of kicked in and improved in quality, she didn't need loosen hay twice a day. So I'd cut back the amount of loosen. So play that one by ear and just see how much loosen you do need to feed. I would keep any alternate fibres that you may have added to the diet for fibre diversity. And you need to keep either the balancer pellet or the fortified feed that you are using in the diet to make sure that your diet is balanced. Or you could use a plethora of other products. So there's lots and lots of different vitamin and mineral supplements that you might use to balance your horse's diet. Again, this is where My Happy Horse really comes in handy, because you can see when your horse's nutrient requirements are being met and when they're not with the app, and you can adjust the diet to your heart's content to make sure that everything is balanced and that all the nutrient requirements are being met. And then your second step in feeding for weight gain and muscle is to start to put more calories and more protein into the diet to encourage your off the track to put on weight. And there are a few different ways you can do that. So the first way you can do that is either to add or increase your high energy fibers. So if you're already using ingredients like sugar beet pulp, copper meal, lupin hulls, oh, that was the other thing we had a lay on. We did have her on copper meal. Hemp hulls, you can just increase those ingredients in the diet and they will increase the amount of calories in the diet. So with weight gain, all you are aiming to do is to feed more calories than your horse strictly needs. And your off the track will use those additional calories to put on condition. So to do that, you can increase these high energy fibers. Your second option is to add or increase any oil that you might be feeding. So oil is really nice for a couple of reasons. First reason is it is really energy dense. So you get a lot of oil in a small volume of feed. And it tends to be a nice cool source of energy. So when you add high energy ingredients to your horse's diet, they will affect behaviour. And it's something that you do need to be really careful of when feeding and off the track for weight gain, is being conscious of the fact that when you increase the amount of energy in the diet in order to encourage weight gain, you will almost always see a change in behaviour. I'll tell you a funny story on that in a second. So the first option is add or increase your high energy fibers. Your second option is to add or increase any oil that you're feeding. Third option, and this is mainly around encouraging muscle as well as weight gain, is you can use legumes or oil seeds. So ingredients like lupins, which are easily top 10 of my favourite feed ingredients, maybe even top 1. I love the things. If you're in any part of the world other than Australia, you need to get sorted and get yourself some lupins because they're amazing ingredients or an amazing feedstuff for horses as long as you use the non-toxic ones. And my other favourite ingredient in this category is really well cooked full fat soybean. You can also use soybean meal, but both of like legumes and oil seeds, they're high in energy, so they will encourage weight gain, and they're also high in really good quality protein, and they will encourage muscle development. And it really is amazing how quickly you can build muscle on horses when you use high quality protein sources, and soybean definitely fits into that category. It is the highest quality protein source we can feed to a horse, and it will be really, really effective at putting muscle on. I'll tell you a story on that one in a second as well. The last option here is to add or increase, if you're already using some cereal grains in the diet, so digestible cereal grains. So suitable options would be things like oats or extruded or boiled barley. You could use stabilized rice bran. All of these digestible high energy ingredients, being really conscious to not overfeed grain and to always feed very digestible, well-cooked cereal grains, because the last thing we want to do at this point in time is to feed a cereal grain that is then going to put starch into the hindgut, because as soon as you put starch into the hindgut, you disadvantage the good fibre-fermenting microbes, and you will give an advantage to what we call the bad starch and sugar fermenting microbes, and it will start to undo some of the hard work you've done in the first 6 months. So if you do use grain, it's really important to keep the amount of grain in the diet controlled. I would say as a general rule, don't exceed a total of 2 kilograms of those ingredients per day combined for a 500 kilogram off the track. And I told a lie before, that wasn't your last option. You do have a fifth option for weight gain and muscle development, and that is to increase your complete feed or your fortified feed. So if you're feeding a fortified feed and there is scope for it to be increased without oversupplying lots of the vitamins and minerals, you can increase that feed in your horse's diet to encourage them to put on weight. So we got to the 6 month mark with a lay, and I thought, okay, there is some scope here to put on a little bit more condition, but it was mainly she was in good condition, but you could look at her and see that she didn't have nearly as much muscle as she had when she arrived. But she was also looking reasonably light in muscling. And if you would like to see her, you can go to the Queensland Off the Track Nutrition Education Hub, and there will be a video there called A Lay, the first 12 months. And you'll see at different points in the video her a lay in the first 6 months versus a lay towards the end of the story. And there's a noticeable difference in muscling. And it happens so quickly. So when we were going away for a couple of weeks in July on a family holiday, and we left LA and all the other horses with a house sitter. And I thought, okay, well, this is good because one, it is really important to remember that these weight gain diets will affect behaviour. And because off the tracks are so bred to move, they are high energy animals typically. And I find that they're even more sensitive than the average horse to this increase in energy in their diet. So do be aware that you might create behaviour you don't necessarily like when you start to feed them for weight gain. And one way to get around that, which is a lot fairer on your horse as well, is to turn them out when you want them to put on weight, put them on the best quality pasture or the best quality hay you've got access to, and then actually bring in these higher energy ingredients and let them put on weight when you're not also trying to ride them. You don't also need them to behave because you're on their back. So when we were going away on this holiday, I thought, great, this is a perfect opportunity. LA won't be getting ridden for a few weeks. Put her on the best quality pasture we had, which she was already on. And I introduced 2 different fortified feeds into her diet. One was a mostly grain-based extruded feed, and the other one was much more fibre-based pellet. And I also added some full-fat soybeans. So I adapted her to these feeds before we went away, and then that was what she was to be fed when we were away. And she also still had the fibres that were in her diet. So she still had the sugar beet pulp and the copper meal and the hemp hulls, and I think I also had her on lupins by this stage as well. And when we came home, I looked at her and thought, my goodness, like she really had put on condition, and she put on a little bit of muscle, and you could see the difference in her. But the funny, not funny thing was that Tamaya went and rode her, and she came back from that ride going, less energy, Mum, because she'd been like she'd actually reared on her, where she had not shown any of that behaviour before, and then was really, really on her toes while Tamaya was riding her. And I apologised to Tamara, went, yep, got it. We'll reduce her energy. And I took those 2 fortified feeds out of her diet, balanced it back up with balancer pellet. And she didn't go back on those feeds, but she didn't need to. She'd put on enough weight during that little period of time when we were away. I kept her on the soybean. Her behaviour came back down to what we had grown to expect from LA, which is really lovely behaviour, particularly when she's at home. She's dead quiet. I kept her on the soybean, and then I was so amazed. So she was in work by this stage to go to the Ishi eventing. So if anyone knows Ishi, the Interschools Horse Extravaganza that is held here in our hometown of Tamworth. So she was in work getting fit and training for that, and it was amazing how quickly she put on muscle. And you can really see the change in her from, say, April through to October. She's massively different in the muscling pattern that she has, and that was just by adding the full-fat soybean to her diet. So because you've got that foundation of gut health, they're still extracting as much energy as possible out of their fibres, and then you're bringing in these extra feeds just to top up their calorie intake and top up their high-quality protein intake, and that's what encourages the weight gain. So you've got a bunch of options there. I'll just go through them quickly again because I spoke about them in a very spread out manner. So you've got a bunch of options for putting weight and muscle on. The first one was that you could either add or increase your high-energy fibres. The second was to add or increase some oil. Third was to add legumes and oil seeds, things like lupins and full-fat soybean or soybean meal. Fourth, you could add or increase some digestible cereal grains, so things like oats, extruded or boiled barley and stabilised rice bran. And the fifth one was if you were feeding a fortified feed already, you can increase that fortified feed. Or in my situation, I actually added 2 fortified feeds. So again, I'd used My Happy Horse to make sure that the diet was all nice and balanced and we're meeting all of her nutrient requirements. I wasn't doubling up on anything. I added those fortified feeds in, and they increased her calorie intake and encouraged her to gain weight. So there's a bunch of different ways you can feed them in this second 6 months. There's a couple of tips here for building muscle. So when you're selecting a balancer pellet or a complete feed, find feeds that use high quality protein. So look for feeds that use things like soybean meal or full fat soybean, because that is the best quality plant-based protein we can feed to horses. And high quality protein just means that they have got all of the essential amino acids that a horse needs to build muscle. I will do a whole podcast episode one day on protein and protein quality and the differences between different proteins, but look for feeds that contain soybean in some way, shape or form, and they will give your off the track the best foundation for building muscle, best nutrition foundation. And then the second tip is that to feed some high quality protein immediately after work. So you can give a small meal of high quality protein right after work. So I rode a lay for a short period of time because Tamaya had to have a surprise surgery and she wasn't able to ride her horse for about 5 weeks. So I was riding her just to keep her fit for the eventing at Ishi. And what I would do is we would go and do our work, and it was often, in a big paddock next door. And then we'd walk home, nice long loose rein, and she would cool off in that amount of time. And then by the time I got back to where I saddle up, I'd take her bridle off. She would normally put her nose back down on the ground and eat the little bit of loosened hay that was left from when I saddled her up. So I haven't mentioned that in this podcast, but when you're riding your off the tracks, make sure that you do feed them loosened hay before you ride to protect their stomach from ulceration, and particularly if they have had ulcers when they came off the track to you. It's so important to fill their stomach up with lucerne, or if you're not feeding lucerne for any reason, any hay will do, but just make sure that they're eating hay when you're saddling them up. It keeps them happy, it keeps their stomach full of fibre and saliva, and that combined will protect their stomach from ulceration. If you want more information on that, go back. I'm pretty sure it's episode number 3 of the Happy Horse Nutrition podcast when I talk specifically about feeding lucerne before you ride and the benefits of that. So Alay would come back, she would eat the lucerne off the ground that she hadn't finished before our ride, and then I would bring her out her feed that had the soybean, full-fat soybean in it. So when you feed them a meal with high quality protein immediately after work, that's right when their muscles are looking for that high quality protein to get stronger and grow. And also the branch chain amino acids that are in that high quality protein will actually stop the muscle from breaking down, and they feed the muscle as well. So they help the muscles to recover from work. So there's lots of reasons why you want to feed high quality protein, and the high quality proteins like soybean, and you can also use whey protein concentrate or whey protein isolate in these situations. And these high quality proteins contain the leucine, which is one of the essential amino acids, and it is the single amino acid that has the key to turning on the on switch for muscle building. So you need to get that amino acid high enough in your horse's blood to actually switch muscle building on. And if you feed these high quality proteins immediately after work, you will switch that muscle building process on, and you also feed the muscles so they can build. So I do have a little post-work muscle building recipe if you want to give it a try. If you're struggling, you use this if you're struggling to put muscle on your off the track. So 250 grams of full-fat soybean. Make sure it's very well cooked full-fat soybean. You can use soybean meal, but you might use 180 to 200 grams of soybean meal, and then 100 grams of whey protein concentrate. And I would mix that into roughly 200 grams of loosened chaff or any other base that your horse is happy to eat immediately after work. And that should give you really good results in building muscle in your off the track. So that brings us to the end of feeding and off the track in the first 12 months. I really can speak from experience with Alay. She was amazing. She came here, she was reasonably unsettled. She didn't know really how to graze very well. She was actually born in the middle of a really severe drought. So, growing up, she probably didn't see. She may have been one of the horses in the Hunter Valley that never saw pasture up until, they were older than 12 months old. It was such a severe drought. I remember there was one cohort of youngsters down there that went through without actually knowing what pasture even was. So she didn't have a lot of grazing skills. And we could see from her microbiome data that she had lost microbiome diversity in her hindgut as well. And I did manage to follow my own advice in the first 12 months with her, and spent that first month just getting her gut full of fibre. And then months 2 through 6, we increased the fibre diversity, the forage diversity. We got as many different forages and fibres into her gut as we could. And then after that 6-month mark, we did introduce the soybean to encourage muscle building. We did increase some feed, or we introduced some feeds rather, to increase her weight or her condition, to encourage her to put on a little bit of extra weight. And by the end of, I think, my most beautiful moment in that whole 12 months with Alay, and she's still here, so she was given to us on the condition that we never sold her. She's part of the family now. She won't be going anywhere, and we just absolutely love her to bits. But my favourite moment in that first 12 months was right towards the end of the 12 months, and we had a local show jump club day. Actually, it was 2 days over the weekend, and there was a dress-up day and competition, and Tamaya and her friend Bella were wanting to take they both had off the tracks, and they were wanting to dress up as jockeys and take their horses as race horses. So it did feel very ironic, because I'd spent this 12 months transitioning Alay from being a racehorse to being a show jumper for Tamaya. And here we are dressing her back up as a racehorse again toward the end of the 12 months. But they did a funny thing where they had a team show jumping. So it was 2 horses in the arena at the same time. And, horse number 1 jumped the first 4 jumps, and then the second horse jumped the next 4 jumps, and so on. They had, I think, maybe 2 minutes, something like that, to jump as many jumps as they could. And then when the judge rang the bell at the end of time, they were told to gallop through the finish pegs. And so the bell rang, and Bella and Tamaya sort of spin their off the tracks around, and they do slow gallop for off the tracks, but they do gallop them through the finish pegs. And then by the time those 2 horses had come out of that arena, they were both on long reins. And they were so relaxed, and they brought them back and stood with all the other horses, and they just went to sleep. So, we had spent time at competitions prior to that where Alay would not stand still, and she was a handful. But she'd gotten to the point in that first 12 months where she was more than happy to stand around at events, walk around on long rein, and go to sleep when she knew nothing was needed of her. So it really does work, this process. They are happy horses, they're healthy horses when you bring them through and spend that time in the first 6 months just rehabbing their gut back to being a healthy horse. It's worth the effort. It's worth the gritted teeth moments when you think that it's not going to work. So just as a really quick recap, first month, get their gut full of fibre. Second month, introduce fibre variety to them. Months 7 through 12, you can start to increase your higher energy ingredients and your high quality protein ingredients to encourage them to put on weight and muscle. And just remember that when you do start to feed them for weight gain, you may likely affect their behaviour. So be careful when you do that. If you can turn them out and give them some space when you're also trying to feed them for weight gain and you're not expecting them to behave under saddle for you, that's the best idea. If you can't do that, then just be conscious that you will be creating a higher energy behaviour and you're off the track when you're feeding them more energy in their feed. And just do it as slowly as possible. So don't try to encourage rapid weight gain. Just try to encourage weight gain at a level where the amount of energy is not so much that you can't control their behaviour and you can't keep their behaviour safe, because it's not fun for you and it's also not fun for them. But have a blast. Honestly, it's been one of the most beautiful things I've ever done in my horse owning career. I love off the tracks. They are the sweetest, most beautiful, most willing, and so incredibly athletic horses that, I know that you will love your time with your off the track, and you will love it even more when you feed them in a way that is supporting their gut health, which then supports this beautiful behaviour, and they'll be nice and healthy for you as well. So have fun. Thank you very, very much for listening. Make sure you keep an eye out for the episode where we do talk about Alay and her gut health in much more detail, and I'll catch you in the next episode. If you'd like to know more about the My Happy Horse virtual equine nutritionist, you can head on over to myhappy.horse. And also while you're there, check out the Dr. Nerida AI, which is me in AI format. And that version of me is happy to answer your questions about horse nutrition 24/7. Thanks again, and we'll catch you soon.